Trench warfare has the reputation of being one of the most tiresome, deadly, and brutal forms of warfare, not only for the body, but also psychologically. In summer, it's sweltering hot, in winter, freezing cold, and in between, you're probably sinking in mud. But still, in Ukraine, trenches are a crucial element for both sides, and storming them is one of the deadliest possible undertakings. So, welcome to Talking Tactics, where this week it's all about trenches. Before we show you some examples from Ukraine, a bit of history. Although we see armies and troops digging into the ground even before, the birth of the modern trench goes back to the 17th century to a French military engineer by the name of Sébastien Lepresse de Vauban, who built them initially as a tool to support troops besieging towns or castles. Troops would dig multiple parallel lines of trenches and connect them to one another so that infantry can move at least relatively safe from incoming enemy fire. Trenches remained merely a part of siegecraft until the improved firepower of weapon systems basically forced both sides, attacking and defending, to make use of trenches, like for example in the American Civil War. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, especially with the stalemate encountered between German, French, British, American troops of other nations on the Western Front, began the until today largest and most significant period of trench warfare in history so far. A typical trench system in World War I consisted of multiple lines. Most trenches were dug in a type of zigzag so that no enemy could fire more than a couple of meters down its length. This form also protected soldiers from shrapnel flung about due to grenades or artillery fire. Each of the main lines was connected to another. Apart from moving troops, that's how they transported food, ammunition, orders, etc. The intricate network of trenches contained command posts, first aid stations, kitchens, latrines. Most trenches had machine gun emplacements or other elevated firing positions built into the trench to defend against an assault, as well as dugouts deep enough to shelter a large number of troops during enemy incoming fire. Today in Ukraine, more than 100 years later, trenches still play a vital part for both sides. Why? In general, the reasons are the same as in World War I. A trench provides cover from incoming fire, it hides you and gives you also a much more comfortable position when defending. There are of course some significant differences. Cluster munition, which is now being delivered to Ukraine, you can check out our video by clicking on the link in the description. Modern tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and especially drones that provide both reconnaissance and attacking options have given the attacking side many more advantages in trench warfare. How to storm a trench. Since 2014, the war in Ukraine, which remained largely static until the launch of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, led to the establishment of a network of trenches that covers much of the front line. When the dynamic of the war slowed down after the liberation of Kherson in the autumn-winter of 2022, especially the Russian side expanded their network of trenches in eastern and southern Ukraine in anticipation of the now undergoing counteroffensive. So if Ukraine wants to advance, there is no other option than storming and capturing this vast network of enemy trenches. Like with most things, there's not only one way to do it. The Russians have the most brutal method, reconnaissance by combat. So they send soldiers ahead, and when they get shot at, the enemy positions are exposed, and they send the next wave, telling them where to go and so on. But if you're not willing to sacrifice that many men, you need to look at other options. If you're lucky, really pummeling and pressuring the enemy by combining heavy weapons like tanks and artillery with fast advancing infantry, you might be able to cause enough panic amongst enemy soldiers that they will try to flee the safety of their trench. We can see this in an example of the 59th Brigade that was posted on the 9th of July. First, drones drop grenades into the trenches. Then, the men advance in armored vehicles, cutting through a field. Frantically, the first Russians leave the trench and flee. Then the men enter the trench and clear out what's left. Looks almost too easy, right? It's not. If the soldiers entrenched are motivated and have a sufficient supply of food, water, and especially ammunition, getting them to leave out of their own will is almost impossible. That means you have to go in. In our next example, you can see Special Operations Forces of the 73rd Marine Center entering an enemy trench in southern Ukraine. They entered the trench from the rear, surprising its inhabitants. The noise, the tight space, the dust, all this gives you just a small impression of the hell of trench warfare. That's why most Ukrainian brigades, and also most Russian ones, have soldiers labeled shturmoviki, which translates loosely, well, to stormtroopers. But of course, just calling them assault troops is just as accurate. It's the job for the toughest of the toughest, and commands the greatest respect from their fellow soldiers. Shturmoviki are part of storm units, battalions, and sometimes even entire brigades, like the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, who specialize in exactly this, storming trenches. So, for our third example, and also to conclude this episode, we want to show you a video of the 3rd Assault Brigade released this June, showing you from a first-hand perspective the true cost, physically and psychologically, of what it takes to storm an enemy trench. Also, this might serve as an explanation if you're wondering why the Ukrainian counteroffensive is slower than expected. And even if in this example the Ukrainian forces are able to complete their mission successfully, don't get fooled by the accompanying soundtrack. Even for the winners, the effects of this experience could very well haunt them for years to come. Thanks for watching Talking Tactics. Hit like and subscribe, and see you next week.